Phil walked out of the room, frustration building within him. He ran a hand through his curly brown locks, blue eyes narrowed after the conversation with his financial advisor. He had always known that going to college was a toss-up for him. It was never going to be that easy for someone from a rural town in Middle America. Phil tried his best to work hard, get good grades, and save as much money as he could for college. But no amount of savings would help him afford even a fraction of what it cost for college. From a young age, Phil knew he wanted to study medicine. He had always wanted to help people. And what better way than to work in medicine? It was the best way to help people, so going to med school was the best way for him to do this. Phil applied to all the scholarships he could think of. It helped, but med school was expensive, and there was still a lot of money Phil had to put towards tuition. This left the dreaded student loans. He didn't want to apply for loans, but there was no choice. Everything seemed okay at first. Phil got to college, moved into his dorms, and prepared to start his first semester. Until a few days before starting, he was called to his advisor's office at the college. He had to speak to Phil about an urgent issue. That never sounded good, but Phil tried to think positively. Phil knocked on the door, stomach flip-flopping when Mr. Ramos told him he could come in. "Come in, Phil." He smiled, trying to keep up a positive front. "Hello, Mr. Ramos. What is it you need to talk to me about?" "It's about your tuition." "What about it? I have scholarships and loans to take care of everything." Mr. Ramos's smile faltered. "See, that's the thing, Phil. There was a hiccup with one of your scholarships, and they ended up not being able to put forward the required amount towards your tuition, so you have an outstanding balance." "And how long do I have to pay off this balance?" This time the smile faded completely. "It needs to be paid by the end of the month." "Mr. Ramos, I can't possibly pay something off that quickly. I need more time." "I'll try to get you some more time, but they are going to expect the payment sooner or later, Phil." "What about payments?" He winced. "I'll try to work towards getting them to allow you to make payments, rather than needing the lump sum." He thought back on the encounter, blood boiling beneath the surface, but there was also despair. All Phil wanted was to work hard and get an education. Wasn't that supposed to be the American dream? He couldn't pay this off, at least not all at once. The only person Phil could think to call was his mother. He needed to tell her about the situation, and when he did, Mum would insist on paying what she could toward it. It didn't feel good when he took her money, but he did need to make some kind of payment on it. So the sooner he could make the payment, the better. Phil dialed his mother's number and didn't have to wait long for her to pick up. "Phil, how did the meeting go?" He sighed softly. "It didn't go very well, Mum. They need me to make this huge payment by the end of the month, or I won't be able to continue with school." "Oh, honey," Mum whispered. "Listen, I'll send you some money right now, okay? It's only a little bit right now, but it should get you through the next few days until I can scrounge up more for you to make a proper payment." "No, Mum, Phil," Mum said dangerously. "Listen, I know you are probably low on spending money given this whole tuition debacle, so let me send you a little bit. I don't want you to have to remain inside all weekend. This will make you worry more." Some places in the town that surround campus only took cash. It was an old town with the college being built around it, essentially. "But what about the tuition payment, Mum? That's going to be too much for you." "Don't worry about it. Just know if you need some spending money, it's in the account." Phil didn't think he'd need it, but his roommates invited him to go out with a group of friends that evening and get some pizza. This particular pizza place only took cash, so Phil ended up having to take a bus into town to go to the ATM. There should have been an ATM on campus, but there wasn't. An oversight, but Phil had enough to worry about right now. The best place to go was the local grocery store in town. It was where a lot of students ended up going at all hours of the night when they needed some late-night snacks for whatever reason. When he got off the bus, it was the middle of the day, so there weren't many people around. He went towards the grocery store, a frown playing on his lips when he realized it was closed for lunch. Damn, Phil mumbled, glancing at his phone to see what time it was. It was 10 minutes to 1, so he still had at least 15 minutes until he had to get back to work. Sighing, Phil leaned against the wall of the store. He had no choice but to wait it out. "The store will be open soon," a raspy voice called out. Phil blinked and looked to his right. He saw an older man in his 40s standing a few feet away, perched on an old picnic table placed in front of the market. The man had long, straggly, greying-brown hair, pulled back into a light ponytail. He was bopping his head to some music playing on his cracked phone that had seen better days. Phil could tell the guy was homeless from his worn-out clothes and homely appearance, but he had this bright smile on his face. It was a little impressive for him to be able to smile so much in the face of such difficulty. "What are you listening to?" Phil asked curiously. "Bob Dylan's masterpiece, Blowing in the Wind," he said wistfully. "Please tell me you know Bob Dylan. I know you're young, but this is a musical genius we're talking about." Phil laughed. "I know Bob Dylan. My mom's a huge fan." "Name's Sam, by the way," he said, holding out his hand towards Phil. "I'm Phil." Sam smiled. "What brings you here, Phil?" "I'm just waiting for the grocery store to open. I need to use the ATM." Suddenly Sam started laughing, which caught him off guard. "You're not from here, are you?" "What makes you think that?" He chuckled. "The ATM in the grocery store hasn't worked for over 6 months." Phil leaned in, trying to catch a look at the ATM through the window. He shielded the sun's rays from his eyes and could see the out-of-order sign positioned right on top of the machine. Crap, Sam was right. The machine was out of order. He looked over at Sam, who was still bopping along to his music. "You were right, Sam. The ATM isn't working." "Told you," Sam laughed. "But I'll tell you how to get to the nearest ATM if you're willing to listen." Phil blinked. "Yes, of course." Just around the corner, there is a barber shop that belongs to George. Good guy, quiet, but always listens. If you look across the street, you'll see a flower shop, and there you'll find an ATM. Don't mention that I sent you there, though. I got drunk one night and broke some of her flower pots outside the shop, so she's not a fan of mine. He couldn't help but laugh. "Thanks a lot, Sam." Sam shook his head. "No problem." While he did need to go to the ATM, Phil lingered behind. Sam was a very curious and interesting man. He didn't want to end the conversation so quickly. "Are you from here?" "Born and raised," Sam said proudly. "I left for a couple of years, but eventually found myself back here." It hit Phil that Sam was wearing a basketball jersey. The jersey was old and bad for wear, but it was a basketball jersey. "Did you ever play basketball?" Asking that question was like opening Pandora's box because Sam's eyes lit up. He looked so happy. "I love basketball. It was my life for so many years. I played it in high school and continued to after graduation." Phil ended up sitting down beside Sam while he gave his monologue. Being this close to Sam made the bruise on the left side of his face very noticeable. Not only that, but he could smell booze coming off him in droves. "Why don't you play anymore?" Sam pulled up his pants legs to reveal thick varicose veins on his calves. "These here pretty much guaranteed that I wouldn't be able to play professionally anymore." It was quite a difficult sight to see. The veins were bulging and looked ready to pop at any moment. Phil immediately felt for him because of how painful it looked. "Why haven't you treated them before?" He shrugged. "It's not that serious." "Sam, it looks pretty serious." "Look, kid, I'll be straight with you, okay?" Sam muttered. "I don't have the money for one, and I honestly don't care. Any money I do get, I spend on booze, so it's not like I'll save anything towards surgery." Before Phil could say anything, a woman came out of the grocery store, ASC, owl on her face. "Sam, what are you doing just sitting there? Lunch ended 10 minutes ago, so it's time for you to get back to work." Sam shot Phil a grin. "I need to get back to work. See you around, kid." He watched Sam walk back inside and felt sadness weighing heavily on his chest. It was a shame that Sam had resigned himself to living with this pain. Phil wished he could do something to help him in some way. Shaking his head, Phil headed down to the flower shop. When he got there, he tried to make sure that he didn't knock over any pots. If Sam was to be believed, and Phil did believe him, then it was best to avoid causing even the smallest amount of damage. Sure enough, the ATM was nestled in the back of the store. The owner eyed him but stopped when an older couple came in after him, looking around the shop. It was full of flowers and other arrangements, but Phil paid them no mind. He was more focused on getting some money from the ATM and getting back to college, but his mind kept drifting back to Sam. The man seemed so easygoing and free despite all his problems. He was homeless, in chronic pain, and had an issue with drinking. It pulled at Phil's heartstrings. There's always someone in the world who has it harder than you. Phil knew he never had it easy in life. He was raised by a single mother who worked practically every day of the week, which resulted in him becoming a latchkey kid by the time he was in his pre-teens. Phil didn't hold any bitterness towards his mother. He admired her because she did everything she could to give him a roof over his head, food on the table, and clothes on his back. He tried to take some of the burden off his mother when he was old enough to work. It wasn't fair for her to have to work so hard, but a teenager could only make so much money. Working and juggling school proved to be almost too much, but he powered through. The one thing that did suffer was Phil's personal life. He didn't get to hang out with friends, date much, or do anything normal teenagers got to do. Phil didn't regret one moment of his high school career. It got him to this point. However, he felt a sense of bitterness taking over him again. What if all that hard work during his high school years was for nothing? The college tuition needed to be paid for this semester. Mr. Ramos said he'd try to get them to let Phil make payments, but he didn't think they would. They wanted their money. It didn't matter if Phil was a struggling student who had to take out student loans. All they cared about was making as much money as they could from their students. Phil started to wonder if it was a good idea to go to college in the first place. He could have gone to community college or a trade school. Sure, Phil did want to have a medical career, but he could have done something else, maybe become a nurse or a nurse aide. But his mother wanted him to reach for the stars. She didn't think something as simple as being in a lower income bracket should prevent Phil from reaching his dreams. Phil knew his mother meant well. She just wanted more for him than she got out of life. His father left when he was still in diapers. They weren't married, and his father didn't pay any child support. It wasn't like his mother didn't try to go after him and get him to pay, but the guy kept moving, never staying in one place or at one job. After getting the money from the ATM, Phil headed back to the bus stop. He walked by the grocery store and looked around for Sam but didn't see him. The guy must have been busy working. With a sigh of disappointment, he continued on his way back to the bus stop. It didn't take the bus long to come and bring him back to college, but his mind kept reminding him of Sam. The week of school finally started, and Phil wished he could only spend his time worrying about adjusting to college. However, all he could worry about was his incoming payment for his tuition. It was all he could think about right now. Mr. Ramos contacted Phil over the weekend. The second he called him, Phil picked up the phone. His heart was hammering in his chest, and his stomach was doing a huge number of flip-flops. It was more than he could stand. "Mr. Ramos?" Phil asked, picking up his phone on the second ring. "Yes. Hello, Phil. I spoke with those at the financial office, and they say that while they can give you until the end of the month, they won't let you make payments." Phil struggled to speak. It felt like his world was closing around him and all he could do was stand there. "So I have until the end of the month, or I'll be kicked out of the college?" "Yes, unfortunately that is going to be the case, Phil. I will keep trying, but they are pretty set in their ways." "Thanks for trying, Mr. Ramos," he sighed. "And I'm going to keep trying my best to get them to reconsider." What Phil wanted to say was that he wouldn't hold his breath, but he didn't want to bring Mr. Ramos down more than he already was. Every day that passed meant that it was one day closer to leaving college. The annoying part about it was that Phil was starting to get into college. He was enjoying going to class, living with his roommate, and just the campus experience. So Phil had to make a choice. Either he could sit there and struggle for the rest of the month, living in abject sadness, or he could try to enjoy the time he had left. It was crazy that he was going to make himself miserable for the remaining time he had. All he could do was make the most out of the few weeks he had here. If he didn't, Phil would regret it. He wasn't going to tell his mother about what was happening. As far as Phil's mother Laura was concerned, she would think that they decided to let him make payments. Then, at the end of the month, Phil would move back home and drop the bomb on his mother. It felt a bit like fooling his mother, but Phil didn't care. He didn't want his mother to feel like she didn't do enough for him. After class one day, Phil decided to go to a dance show that was in the college gym. It was open to the whole campus, and with a free few hours, he decided to go there. This was a part of the college he had never been to before. Phil almost lost his way a few times, but the joy of using a smartphone meant he could easily find his way. On his way to the gym, he came across a display that showcased all the famous athletes who had graduated from the college. As someone who loved basketball, Phil was automatically intrigued by all the famous athletes who had gone to this college at some point. What intrigued Phil was one particular picture. The player in the picture looked very familiar. He saw a couple more pictures of the man, including one where the man was with his team. "Sam?" Phil asked, eyes widening. No, it couldn't be. The homeless man he met the other day couldn't be this famous basketball player from the team pictured here, yet they could be twins. It was a little uncanny how much they looked alike. The closer Phil looked, the more he remembered everything Sam told him the other day. "I love basketball. It was my life for so many years. I played it in high school and continued to after graduation." This was exactly what Sam had told him. While the guy in the pictures was a few decades older, it was Sam. Phil couldn't deny that. He wondered how Sam ended up being the star basketball player in college to being homeless, struggling with a drinking problem. It said underneath that Sam used to play the position of guard. He smiled sadly, wishing that Sam hadn't ended up with those thick, bulging veins in his feet. For some reason, Sam was never able to get them fixed, and it led to his current situation. Phil eventually wandered away from the display, wanting to get to the dance show and not miss anything, but he was unable to concentrate much on it. His mind kept drifting back to Sam. How was Sam doing right now? He seemed to do some odd jobs around town, but that couldn't pay much. Phil wondered where he stayed at night. It was likely some abandoned building or somewhere public like under a bridge or in the park. Despite all that, Sam still had that bright, goofy smile on his face. Phil thought of it and found himself starting to smile as well. Over the next week, Phil was busy adjusting to school. He was adjusting pretty well and trying not to let the fact that he might have to drop out at the end of the month bother him. Phil's mother was still under the impression that he could make payments. When his mother called him one evening saying that she had managed to scrounge together a lot of the money, he was thrown for a loop. "How?" Phil asked his mother. She laughed. "I have my ways." "Mom, you didn't have to do that, whatever you did." "You're my son," she told Phil. "If I don't take care of you, who will?" "I'm an adult," Phil tried to argue. On the other end, his mum laughed and cut him off. "Phil, you're 18. You are barely an adult." He decided it was pointless to argue with his mother and accepted what she was saying right now. The point was the money was in the account now. He could stop back at his dorm, write a check, and then write out a check for the financial office. It would cover whatever was left on his bill. Phil wouldn't have to worry about getting kicked out of college. He would be able to work towards achieving the goal of getting a medical degree. It was all he had ever wanted. But the moment Phil got to the closed door leading to the financial aid office, he stopped in his tracks. He couldn't stop thinking about Sam and those bulging veins in his calves. Slowly, Phil looked down at the check in his hands. Phil had yet to write any other information besides the amount on the check. The check was still a blank check. Phil could easily make the check out to anyone. He didn't have to go to the financial office to pay his tuition. There were so many ways Phil could work in the medical field without becoming a doctor or something that required years and years of schooling. He could get a lesser degree and work as a nurse or something. It still cost money, but not as much as the schooling he was looking towards doing. Slowly, Phil began to walk away from the financial aid office. His feet took him to the bus stop right outside campus. Phil waited for the next bus, acting as if he was on autopilot. It wasn't fair that Sam had to keep suffering day after day. Phil had this check here, and if he could put this money towards helping him afford surgery, then at least he would know the money was going to a good cause. Once Phil was in town, he started the search for Sam. He didn't know where he lived, so he decided to go straight to the grocery store. But Sam wasn't outside or inside. "Excuse me, is Sam here?" Phil asked the first worker he saw. The young woman blinked. "Sam? No, he doesn't work today." "Do you know where I can find him?" "I think he spends much of his free time at the park." Phil raced to the park. Sure enough, he found Sam there towards the picnic tables. He was bopping his head along to some music. "Bob Dylan again," Phil called out, causing Sam to jump. When he realized it was Phil, Sam grinned. "Phil! Fancy seeing you here," he greeted. "And of course, it's Bob Dylan, kid. I could listen to him on a loop for the rest of my life." Phil sat beside Sam, the check weighing heavily in his pocket. It was just a small piece of paper, but it felt like it weighed a ton. "Sam, how are the calves?" "Same as yesterday," he said with a chuckle. "Why so interested in my calves?" Phil smiled. I know I may be overstepping my bounds here, but I managed to raise some money at the college to cover the cost for you to get surgery." "Kid, you're not serious, are you?" "I have the check right here." To prove it to Sam, he showed him the check. The older man started to tear up and wiped his eyes with his dirty sleeve. "You didn't have to do that." "I know, but I wanted to do it," Phil insisted. "You can say no, Sam. No one can force you to accept the money and get the surgery, but know that this check is here if you want to go forward with it." Sam was quiet for a while, but eventually he spoke, and Phil was relieved by what he said. "All right, I'll do it." Phil grinned. "It makes me so happy to hear that, Sam." The same day, Phil accompanied Sam to the local clinic. It took over an hour of waiting for Sam to even get back to see a doctor, but when he came out, he had some papers. "They gave me a referral to this office that takes care of this sort of thing in the next town over. I have an appointment tomorrow." Sam looked uneasy, but Phil wasn't going to let him down. "I'll go with you." "Kid, don't you have classes or something?" Phil shook his head. "No, I don't have any classes tomorrow, so I'm free all day." The man looked relieved. Phil had a feeling that Sam wouldn't want to go by himself. After all, Phil was the one who was pushing him to get this surgery. He wouldn't even bother getting it done and would be content to suffer. It wasn't Sam's fault, of course. He had no money. Why would he even entertain the idea of getting it in the first place? Phil showed up in town bright and early. He paid for an Uber for them to go to the next town, noticing that Sam was very silent. "Second thoughts?" Phil asked. Sam shrugged. "No, but I'm not going to lie, kid. I'm nervous as hell about this. Never been one for surgery, and that hasn't changed over the years." "Well, if you want to back out, all you have to do is tell me so. I don't mind having the Uber turn back around and take us back to town." "No, kid, we've come this far, and I want to see it through." It was a relief for Phil to hear that. He settled back in the seat beside him and felt his heart beating wildly in his chest. That was it. They were here now, and there was no going back. It didn't take long for them to get in. When they were filling out the papers, Sam got a bit nervous, but Phil tried to assure him that it was going to be okay. He would pay for it, and it would all be okay. Unbeknownst to Sam, he did go ahead and check out the price. It turned out he had just enough to cover the cost of the surgery, much to his relief. If Phil wasn't able to cover it all, he didn't know what he would do. All of this would have ended up being for nothing. When Sam got called back, Phil gave him a thumbs up. A few minutes after he was called back, Phil was called to the front. "Excuse me, can I just have you confirm the spelling of the patient's name? I want to make sure I put it in right." "It's Rockhold." The woman paused. "Wait, it's not Rockfeld?" No, I'm sorry, my handwriting is terrible. It's Rockhold. Excuse me, she muttered, suddenly rushing off. When she returned, there was a doctor next to her. Hello, I'm the doctor here. Are you Sam's relative? No, he's just a friend I recently met, and I'm here to pay for his surgery. The doctor blinked. You want to pay for someone you barely know? Well, he can't afford it and has no means to save up the money, Phil told him. I have the money, so I thought I'd help him out. Aren't we supposed to pay it forward for those less fortunate? He blinked again. Please, excuse me for a moment. I need to go check on Mr. Rockhold. It was a little bizarre to see the doctor suddenly rush off, but Phil waited. He ended up just sitting back down, waiting to see what was going to happen with Sam. After the man finally came out, Phil stood up and walked back to the counter. Hello, sorry it took so long. I was just talking with Sam, and we've got him all set for surgery. All right, can you just tell me how much it will be and where I can pay? The doctor's smile widened. That's not going to be necessary. What? There's no need for you to pay. We're going to cover the entire treatment, so he has no remaining expenses. Phil blinked. What do you mean? You don't have to pay anything, young man. It's all set. But, Phil started to say, but then he realized he shouldn't let himself get so upset by this because either way, Sam was getting the surgery and he still had his tuition money. Is that all? Yes. The doctor chuckled. I'll send Mr. Rockhold out after we confirm his surgery date. Thank you. Phil sat there, waiting for Sam to come out. He still couldn't believe everything that was happening. The doctor and the office were covering the surgery. Maybe they had some charity set aside for helping people who were struggling. This was the only thing Phil could think of that made sense. He wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Sam's surgery was going to be covered. This was amazing, and the best thing that ever could have happened. Ready to go, kid? Sam asked once he came out. Phil smiled and nodded. Yeah, let's go. The surgery was going to happen next week. It was on a day when Phil didn't have school, so he wouldn't have to worry about missing any classes. Everything seemed to be working out. If only Phil hadn't gotten ahead of himself. The surgery ended up being a huge success, much to everyone's relief, but after Sam recovered, he realized he had no other place to go. It was something Phil should have realized. He knew Sam was homeless, but still pushed forward. This meant he was further responsible for Sam and needed to help him. What kind of friend to Sam would he be if he didn't? Why don't you stay with me? Phil asked, catching Sam by surprise. Are you sure about that kid? I don't want to get in the way of you and your roommate. Besides, does your roommate even want some old, injured guy to come stay with you for a few weeks? Phil grinned. I already brought it up to him, Sam. He says he's fine if you want to come stay with us, but you don't have to. I'll find some way to pay for a hotel if you... Kid, come on, you've done enough, he muttered. I'm not going to expect you to pay for a hotel after covering the surgery, so it's perfectly fine if I stay with you. Better than sleeping outside, anyway. He winced. I didn't pay for your surgery. Huh? The doctor and the clinic agreed to cover all your expenses for some reason. Can you believe it? Sam blinked. The doctor did ask if I was a basketball player randomly. Maybe that has something to do with it. He could have just noticed your jersey like I did. True, Sam muttered. None of it made sense, but Phil decided it was just one of those things that they would never have answers for. Perhaps the doctor just wanted to help out someone who was desperately in need of care. It's what Phil ended up doing, after all. He was willing to spend his tuition money on Sam's surgery because it felt like the right thing to do. Sam didn't have many things to his name, so when he moved into Phil's dorm, he had just one bag with him. Phil even went as far as to lend Sam some clothes. His clothes were worse for wear, and they were nearly the same size, so it didn't matter if he wore some of these things. You don't know how much this means to me, Phil, Sam said later that night as they were enjoying some pizza. I don't know why you're doing all this for some old drunken basketball player. Because I want to help, Sam. That's all there is to it. He nodded, giving Phil a grin. I get it, kid. Living with Sam wasn't that hard to adjust to. For most of the day, Sam was in town, working and doing odd jobs. Phil and his roommate were busy with class. Sam could move around better than ever, much to Phil's amazement. It was exactly why he wanted him to get the surgery in the first place. Sam might have a lot of other issues to figure out in life, but at least he could help take care of one. A few weeks after Sam moved in, Phil got a call from Dr. Jones. He had to rack his brain, but then he realised that Dr. Jones was the guy who did the surgery on Sam and said the whole surgery was taken care of. Phil wondered how he got his phone number, but he did put his number down on the form he helped Sam fill out. It explained why he had Phil's number. However, why was he reaching out to him? The surgery happened a while ago and Sam was doing fine. There should be no reason. Phil? He blinked. Oh, sorry, Dr. Jones, I just dazed out there. What were you saying about the reason why you called? I was hoping to invite you and Sam to dinner. Dinner? Phil asked with a frown. Okay, I think that sounds like a good idea. Can you text me the address? I'll let you know when I'm free so we can plan the dinner accordingly. Sounds good. The doctor sent the address. It was a small diner in town, but it had the best food. Phil had eaten there a few times and he looked forward to eating there again. When Sam got back, Phil mentioned the phone call. Sam looked just as confused as he was. They want us to come to dinner? Sam asked with a frown that soon broke into a grin. Hey, it's a free, delicious meal, so I say let's go this weekend. Phil laughed. All right, if you're good with going, then I will too. Then it's a plan. Phil texted Dr. Jones back, letting him know that they could go sometime on the weekend. They decided on an early dinner on Saturday at around 4 p.m. The entire time he was getting ready, Phil was racking his brain trying to figure out what was going on. Why did Dr. Jones call him up out of the blue? It seemed like there was something hidden behind the doctor's offer, like he knew something they didn't, and for the life of him, he couldn't figure it out. The bus was a little late, so it ended up getting them to the town at exactly 4 p.m. Phil texted the doctor, trying to let him know that they were going to be a little late, but Dr. Jones assured him that they would be fine, and it didn't matter if they were late. From the moment he and Sam walked into the diner, Phil spotted the doctor with the woman from behind the counter and another young woman. He was struck by how beautiful this woman was. She had long blonde hair, glittering blue eyes, and the prettiest smile. Hello, Dr. Jones, Phil greeted. Hello, Phil, Sam. This is my wife Madeline and daughter Emma, he said. By the way, how is the foot, Sam? Sam grinned. It's doing a lot better now. I can move around and not be in pain. It's something I never thought I'd have. That's great to hear, Dr. Jones exclaimed, motioning for them to sit. So, Phil, how is school going? Phil blinked. It's fine. I'm adjusting better than I thought I would, and looking forward to the coming semesters. He wondered how the doctor ever found out he was going to college. Did he say something back at the clinic? Phil didn't think he did, but maybe he had mentioned something while talking to Sam, and Madeline overheard since she was right there at the counter. After ordering their food, Dr. Jones cleared his throat. Sam, before we eat, can I ask you something? Of course. He gestured towards his daughter. I know I already introduced her, but does my daughter Emma Jones ring any bells for you? Not really. What about the Emma Jones of Willowbrook Fund? Phil looked at Sam, who looked extremely confused, but then his eyes widened and tears sprang to his eyes. This is little Emma Jones? Emma smiled. It's me, Sam. Sam started to cry, startling Phil. Dr. Jones chuckled, sensing how confused he was. You see, Phil, Sam Rockhold is a legend in our family. Even after getting kicked off his basketball team after a bad season and not having a way to make more income, he still donated all of his money to help my daughter Emma here afford expensive treatment. She was very sick at the time, and without it, she would have passed. Phil gasped. So when we went to the clinic a few weeks ago, you knew who he was? After you told my wife the correct name, I realized it was indeed Sam. You see, we have been looking for Sam all these years. We wanted to thank him and give back, but no matter how hard we looked, we couldn't find him. It was like he just vanished off the face of the earth. Sam sniffed. I wanted to disappear once I couldn't play basketball anymore. There is no shame in what has happened to you, Dr. Jones assured, giving Sam a warm smile. And now that you are here, I want to properly thank you for helping our daughter. It's not something you have to thank me for, Doctor. I knew the moment I saw that ad for donating to Emma's cause, I had to help. Sure, it would bankrupt me and make it so I had no more money, but I didn't care. This was the right thing to do. Emma stood up and held her arms out to Sam. Sam, can I have a hug? Of course, Sam sobbed. He climbed out of the booth and then wrapped his arms around Emma. The scene made tears spring to Phil's own eyes. This was all unbelievable. Imagine that just running into Sam that one day led to all of this. It made Phil even more grateful that the whole issue with his tuition happened. If it hadn't, he never would have met Sam that day and started talking with him. Phil wiped at his eyes. I can't believe all of this. It's amazing how everything has worked out. Madeline, Dr. Jones's wife, smiled at Phil. Phil, I also want to thank you for helping a man you barely knew. You gave up your tuition money knowing you'd have to leave college at the end of the month. This is why we want to help you. He blinked. What? We admire you, Phil. You're the son of a hard-working single mother, and since you were willing to sacrifice your tuition for a random stranger, we are going to pay off your loans as well as any other expenses that arise during your college career. Phil said, choking up and unable to find the right words. Thank you so much. You don't know how much this means to me. Madeline smiled. We should be thanking you. If you didn't help Sam out, then we never would have been able to reach out to him again to give him our utmost thanks for saving our daughter's life. For a while, only the sounds of Sam weeping and Phil sniffing could be heard. After they gathered their emotions, they went back to eating. But just as dessert was being brought out, Madeline and Dr. Jones dropped another bomb. Sam, we already heard that you are struggling to look for housing and work, which is why we're going to help you find an apartment and get a job, Madeline said. There's a coaching job at the private school where our kids have gone, and we'd like you to work there as the basketball coach. Sam started to sob again. You two are doing too much for me. Sam, you helped give us the past 15 years with our daughter. There isn't enough thanks we can give you, Dr. Jones murmured, some tears streaming down his cheeks. Phil didn't bother trying to hide his tears this time. He couldn't believe how all of this was playing out. It almost seemed too good to be true. To make sure it was true, Phil reached up and pinched his cheek. No one noticed when Phil pinched himself or jumped slightly from the pain. When dessert came, it was difficult for Phil to turn off the waterworks and focus on eating. He was much too emotional right now. Wait until Phil told his mother about everything that was going on. She wasn't going to believe what had happened and would be so thrilled. Perhaps also a little angry when she learned Phil did try to use the tuition money for something else. But she would adjust to it and realize that Phil was only doing it because he cared for Sam. Phil's first semester went by very quickly, and so did the second semester. He was getting close to the end of his spring semester and was realizing that he would be returning home to his rural town for the summer. As much as he wanted to see his mother, he was a little saddened to be going because of his relationship with Emma. After meeting Emma that day at the diner, they got to talking. Phil learned that Emma was going to the same college but was a sophomore, whereas he was a freshman. Even though they were in different years, the two of them would meet up during lunch and whenever they didn't have classes. He felt this attraction and connection with Emma from the moment he saw her. Phil wasn't sure how Emma felt right away, so he decided to keep it to himself, not wanting to ruin what was growing between them. But then, one day, Emma was the one to confess her feelings, much to the surprise of Phil. The two were sitting on campus, just enjoying the nice weather. Phil turned to Emma and smiled, wishing that he could tell her he was in love with her. It might seem too soon, but Phil knew this was what he felt towards Emma. There was no denying that. "Phil?" He asked. Emma leaned forward, pressing her lips against his. Instantly, Phil froze up. She laughed and broke the kiss. "I love you," Phil gaped. "You love me?" "Yes," Emma said confidently. "Do you feel the same way?" She sounded unsure if it was a good idea for her to confess her feelings. He didn't want her to think that, but Phil knew how to remedy that. "God, yes," Phil blurted out. "I love you too." Emma giggled, throwing her arms around Phil. They kissed again, but this time Phil didn't freeze up. He kissed her back and was filled with this intense happiness. Phil didn't remember the last time he was ever this happy. "I'm so glad you love me too. I was worried you didn't." Phil laughed. "Really? I thought it was pretty obvious I felt the same way. I had an idea, but I couldn't be sure." Phil thought about this, a smile making its way onto his face. He couldn't believe that he and Emma ever got together. They were getting stronger than ever. When he told his mum about dating Emma, she started gushing about how happy she was for him and that she wanted to meet Emma right away. It took a long time for Phil to calm her down because she was so happy. Phil didn't date much in high school. He was too busy trying to keep his grades up and working. But now, Phil didn't have to spend all his free time at school or work. He had to focus on school, but he could also enjoy college like all the other students. It wouldn't be possible if not for Emma's parents. He was still so thankful for them that they decided to take care of his tuition. One day over the summer, Phil was intent on getting his mother together with Emma and Emma's parents. It would be a bit of a nerve-wracking meeting, but he knew it would work out in the end. As good as things were for Phil, things were even better for Sam. His life had changed so much since Phil met him at the grocery store that afternoon. Sam was still living in the apartment the Joneses provided him, and he was still working as a basketball coach at the private school. He still kept in contact with Sam. He met up with him after he was done with work at the private school. Phil remembered how happy he looked. Phil was waiting just outside the school. When Sam walked out, he smiled at him and waved to the older man. "Hey Sam, good to see you." Sam grinned. When they were close enough, he pulled Phil into a surprise hug, but Phil didn't hesitate to return it. "Good to see you too, kid. How are you doing?" "Pretty good," Phil told him. "School is still as challenging as ever, but I love the challenge." "How about you and Emma?" Phil cleared his throat. "We're doing good." This caused Sam to chuckle. "It sounds like the two of you are getting serious. Are you getting serious?" He couldn't help the flush that came to his cheeks. "Yeah, we are." "Then you'll have to invite me to the wedding," Sam teased. Phil's eyes widened. "Wedding, Sam? It's a little too early to be talking about a wedding." "Never too early." Even though Sam was teasing him, it was good to be spending some time with him. The two talked for a while at the school, but then ended up going for a bite to eat. Sam told him all about how he loved coaching his students. He said they always managed to put a smile on his face and wanted to learn. The thing Phil noticed as Sam told this story was how happy he looked. In the entire time he'd known Sam, the man always had a genuine smile. But this one was different. It looked like it was free of worries. After sharing a meal, the two hugged again. "I need to get back to school," Phil said reluctantly. Sam grinned. "It's all right. I'll see you this weekend if you have some free time, okay? Just give me a call. I do have a phone now." "I should have some free time. If not, I'll make some free time for you, Sam." As strange as it was, Sam had become his best friend. They were in two different stages of life, and Sam was much older. But this was how Phil felt. He hadn't asked Sam, but he was pretty sure he felt the same way. Now, the day before Phil was set to go back home for the summer, he and Emma went for a walk on the hiking trail near the school. They walked for a while, eventually sitting down on some rocks and gazing at the mountains in the distance. This was exactly why the two of them decided to come out here. Emma suggested catching the sunset and watching how it disappeared behind the mountains. Phil had been wanting to do that since he came here but never had the chance. Now he did. "You know, it's an amazing sight," Emma whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "It is." Emma smiled. "I'm glad that we'll have this moment to keep us going for the rest of the summer." He chuckled. "Same here." As Phil sat there with Emma enjoying the sunset, he was struck by the idea of how everything had changed for him. When he first came to college, he wasn't even sure he would be able to finish the semester because of payment issues. Yet now he didn't have to worry about his college being paid for. Phil had his entire education taken care of, so he could just focus on school and not have to work. The same went for his mum. She no longer needed to work like a dog trying to pay for his tuition. This was something he was happiest about. Phil loved his mother, and being able to see her finally take it easy after working hard for so many decades was a relief. If anyone deserved it, then she did. All Phil did was try to help someone who seemed like they were in a bad place. He wasn't doing it because he could be rewarded with something or wanted clout. Phil genuinely wanted to help out Sam and get him some comfort when he had to move around. The fact that it led to all of this was so crazy. Life was truly unexpected. One small action could lead to so many changes in a person's life. It was truly mind-boggling. "Phil?" Emma asked, breaking him out of his thoughts. Is everything okay? You seem a bit distracted." Phil smiled down at her, wrapping his arm a little more tightly around Emma. "Yes, I'm fine. I was just thinking about how difficult it's going to be to not see you over the summer." Emma giggled. "We'll keep in contact with text, video chat, and phone calls." He knew that they would be able to stay connected that way, but it wasn't the same as being able to wrap his arms around Emma. Seeing her face to face, cuddling with her, and just talking with her was something he was going to miss every single day they were apart. "We'll have to visit each other at some point because I know I can't go a whole summer without seeing you." Phil grinned. "Same here. I also can't go a whole summer without seeing Sam, so this is even more reason for us to get together." He didn't know what the future held, but he was optimistic that it would work out for not only him, but also Emma and Sam.